Hello, grade 10. So we're going to be continuing Tale of the Cities in front of my bookshelves. So we're in book 2, chapter 3, A Disappointment. I know you read chapter 2 with teacher Kiara, so we are continuing this. Okay? So Mr. Attorney General had to inform the jury that the prisoner before them, though young in years, was old in the treasonable practices which claimed the forfeit of his life. That this correspondence with the public enemy was not a correspondence of today or of yesterday or even of last year or of the year before, that it was certain that the prisoner had, for longer than that, been in the habit of passing and repassing between France and England on secret business of which he could give no honest account, that, if it were in the nature of traitorous ways to thrive, which happily it never was, the real wickedness and guilt of his business might have remained undiscovered. That Providence, however, had put it into the heart of a person who was beyond fear and beyond reproach to ferret out the nature of the prisoner's schemes, and struck with horror to disclose them to His Majesty's Chief Secretary of State and most honorable Privy Council. That this patriot would be produced before them, that his position and attitude were, on the whole, sublime, that he had been the prisoner's friend, but at once, in an auspicious and an evil hour detecting his infamy, had resolved to emulate the traitor he could no longer cherish in his bosom on the sacred altar of his country. That, if statues were decreed in Britain as in ancient Greece and Rome to public benefactors, the shining citizen would assuredly have had one. That, as they were not so decreed, he probably would not have one. That virtue, as had been observed by the poets in many passages which he well knew the jury would have, word for word at the tips of their tongues, whereat the jury's countenances displayed a guilty consciousness that they knew nothing about the passages, was in a manner contagious, more especially the bright virtue known as patriotism or love of country. That the lofty example of this immaculate and unimpeachable witness for the crown, to refer to whom, however unworthily, was an honor, had communicated itself to the prisoner's servant, and had engendered in him a holy determination to examine his master's table drawers and pockets and secrete his papers. That he, Mr. Attorney General, was prepared to hear some disparagement attempted of this admirable servant, but that, in a general way, he preferred him to his, Mr. Attorney General's, brothers and sisters, and honored him more than his, Mr. Attorney General's, father and mother. That he called with confidence on the jury to come and do likewise. That the evidence of these two witnesses, coupled with the documents of their discovering that would be produced, would show the prisoner to have been furnished with the lists of His Majesty's forces and of their disposition and preparation, both by sea and land, and would leave no doubt that he had habitually conveyed such information to a hostile power. That these lists could not be proved to be in the prisoner's handwriting, but that it was all the same, that indeed it was rather the better for the prosecution, as showing the prisoner to be artful in his precautions. Okay, pause. All right. So basically, the whole of chapter 3 is going to be a criminal case. It's going to be this trial of this man who's accused of being a traitor of England. And so we're first heard the lawyer of the state. The attorney general is the lawyer who's representing the state. So he's the one against the prisoner. And basically, it is still one paragraph. I mean, we've been going on for 2 pages already, but it's one paragraph. It's just to show how long-winded and non-stop talk this lawyer is doing. And he's basically saying that the traitor, the one accused of being a traitor, has been traveling back and forth between England and France for several years now. Okay, and then they have two witnesses, good kuno, who can prove that he is a spy, he is a traitor. And then he just starts being like, oh, this witness is I admire him more than my brother and sister. I love him more than my brother and sister. I admire him more than my father and mother. You people should do the same. He used to be friends with the accused, but then he discovered that he was a spy, and so gave up this feeling of he gave up this feeling of friendship for the sake of the country, for the safety of the country. So basically, he's just super talking about how good his witness is. And then he even said that even the proof, are the documents where they knew he was a spy. So he went through the man's personal things and he found a letter, and this letter is proof that he's a spy, but it's not in the accused handwriting, which only proves that the accused is very artful in his being a spy. It doesn't look like his handwriting, but he did that on purpose to cover up that he's a spy. Okay, so it's very long-winded. It's very flattering to his witness, and it's very accusatory, obviously, of the accused. So what do you think? Do you feel like this lawyer is being fair? We'll continue with it, huh? I want you to kind of decide which side you're on after listening to the arguments, if you think that this accused man is really a spy or not. So we're kind of in the courtroom in this we're in the courtroom good in this scene. So imagine you actually being there and hearing the argument. Maybe you can pretend you're a jury member. That the proof would go back 5 years and would show the prisoner already engaged in these pernicious missions within a few weeks before the date of the very first action fought between the British troops and the Americans. That for these reasons, the jury, being a loyal jury as he knew they were, and being a responsible jury as they knew they were, must positively find the prisoner guilty and make an end of him, whether they liked it or not. That they never could lay their heads upon their pillows, that they never could tolerate the ideas of their wives laying their heads upon their pillows, that they never could endure the notion of their children laying their heads upon their pillows. In short, that there never more could be from their or theirs any laying of heads upon pillows at all unless the prisoner's head was taken off. So the lawyer was like, how can you rest at night if you find this man innocent? You're putting everyone, your family, your wife, your children in danger if you make a traitor go free, if you say this traitor or this spy is innocent. That had Mr. Attorney General concluded by demanding of them, in the name of everything he could think of, with a round turn in it, and on the faith of his solemn asseveration, he already considered the prisoner as good as dead and gone. When the Attorney General ceased, a buzz arose in the court as if a cloud of great blue flies were swarming about the prisoner in anticipation of what he was soon to become. When it toned down again, the unimpeachable patriot appeared in the witness box. Okay, so everyone in the courtroom was buzzing and like, as if they were flies already circling the corpse of the accused, of the criminal. Okay, and then the witness, the great patriot as described by the lawyer, by the Attorney General, steps onto the witness stand. Mr. Solicitor General then, following his leader's lead, examined the patriot, John Barsad, gentleman by name. So John Barsad is the name of the witness, of the patriot, okay? The one who's saying that the accused is a spy, is a traitor. The story of his pure soul was exactly what Mr. Attorney General had described it to be, perhaps, if it had a fault, a little too exactly. Having released his noble bosom of its burden, he would have modestly withdrawn himself, but that the Whig gentleman with the papers before him, sitting not far from Mr. Lorry, begged to ask him a few questions. The Whig gentleman, sitting opposite, still looked at the ceiling of the court. Had he ever been a spy himself? No, he scorned the base insinuation. What did he live upon? His property. So, guys, this is the questioning, okay? So, it's not written in dialogue form. It's written in paragraph form because usually in a courtroom, it's just good a back and forth. It's question, answer, question, answer. And what's nice about what Dickens does here is he doesn't give you the way it's said. He kind of implies what the truth is just based on this simple exchange of question and answer. Okay, so he doesn't put like the witness was lying or the witness was telling the truth. It's up to readers to kind of figure it out on their own just based on the testimony given. Okay, where was his property? He didn't precisely remember where it was. What was it? No business of anybody's. Had he inherited it? Yes, he had. From whom? Distant relation. Very distant? Rather. Ever been in prison? Certainly not. Never in a debtor's prison. Didn't see what that had to do with it. Never in a debtor's prison. Come once again, never. Yes. How many times? 2 or 3 times. Not 5 or 6, perhaps. Of what profession? Gentleman. Ever been kicked? Might have been. Frequently? No. Ever kicked downstairs? Decidedly not. Once received a kick on the top of a staircase and fell downstairs of his own accord. Oh my gosh. Okay, so Barsad is the witness, and he was kind of amped up, or kind of like set up to be this great honorable patriot. And then he goes on the stand, and the lawyer of the one accused of being a criminal starts to interrogate the witness and kind of says like, so have you ever been to prison? And then Barsad was like, no, I've never been to prison. And then the lawyer is like, really, never even to a debtor's prison? A debtor's prison is kanang when you can't pay your utang, you're imprisoned for not being able to pay it. And the witness was like, oh yeah, I was in a debtor's prison. And then the lawyer was more than once. And then the Barsad was like 2 or 3 times. Okay, so you admitted nga, yes, I was put in a debtor's prison 2 or 3 times. And then the lawyer was like, really? Not 5 or 6 times? And it was 5 or 6 times. And then he then asked, like, have you ever been kicked? Have you ever been like attacked? Okay. And he was like, no, I've never been kicked. I've never been attacked. And then the lawyer was like, well, what about, were you ever kicked downstairs? It's very obvious that the lawyer knows things about this witness, and that's why he's bringing it up in court. He's asking him about it so that he'll be exposed. The witness, he's not as honorable as we were made to believe. And he said, were you never kicked like down a flight of stairs? And then Barsad was like, no, okay, I was kicked, but I didn't fall down because of the kick. It's like I was kicked and then I chose to fall down. I let myself fall down. So again, Dickens, guys, is known good for kind of making his characters so silly that it's funny. It's still realistic. It's not cartoony because people do act like this where they say stupid things. Humans say stupid things. And that's kind of the point of this, where it's like, you were never kicked down a flight of stairs. And then he was like, no, I wasn't kicked. I was kicked on top of stairs, but then I chose to fall down. So it's just, Barsad is kind of stupid. Kicked on that occasion for cheating at dice. Something to that effect was said by the intoxicated liar who committed the assault, but it was not true. Swear it was not true? Positively. Ever live by cheating at play? Never. Ever live by play? Not more than other gentlemen do. Ever borrow money of the prisoner? Okay, so the lawyer then is asking, have you ever borrowed money from the person you're accusing is a traitor? Yes. Ever pay him? No. Was not this intimacy with the prisoner in reality a very slight one, forced upon the prisoner in coaches, inns, and packets? No. Sure he saw the prisoner with these lists? Certain. Knew no more about the lists? No. Had not procured them himself, for instance? No. Expect to get anything by this evidence? No. Not in regular government pay and employment to lay traps? Oh dear no. Or to do anything? Oh dear no. Swear that over and over again, no motives but motives of sheer patriotism, none whatever. Okay, so the main evidence against our accused are these lists. Okay, these lists that are not in his handwriting, and si Barsad, the witness, is kind of asked that, didn't you owe the accused money? And it's like, yes, I owed him money. Like, did you ever pay him for how much money you owed him? And like, no, I did not pay him. They were not really friends. It was pointed out that they were not really close friends. It was more of Barsad kept forcing himself on the accused. Okay? And then they said that, aren't the lists yours? Don't they belong to you? And he was like, no, they don't belong to me. And then they also said, like, why are you coming forward and accusing this man of being a traitor? Isn't the government paying you to say this? And he's like, no, I'm only doing it because I'm an honorable patriot. Okay, so again, it's the information is given in such a straightforward manner. You form your own opinions, okay, based on the testimony. But do you think you can trust Barsad as a witness? The virtuous servant, Roger Clive, swore his way through the case at a great rate. He had taken service with the prisoner in good faith and simplicity 4 years ago. He had asked the prisoner aboard the Calais packet if he wanted a handy fellow, and the prisoner had engaged him. He had not asked the prisoner to take the handy fellow as an act of charity, never thought of such a thing. He began to have suspicions of the prisoner and to keep an eye upon him. So, okay, so we talked about Bersad, all right, and now we're talking about the other witness, the second witness, Roger Clay, who is an employee of the accused, okay? And he said, I was working for him. I had a suspicion he was a spy, okay? So this is his testimony. Um, in arranging his clothes while traveling, he had seen similar lists to these in the prisoner's pockets over and over again. He had not put them there first. He had seen the prisoner show these identical lists to French gentlemen at Calais and similar lists to French gentlemen both at Calais and Boulogne. He loved his country and couldn't bear it and had given information. He had never been suspected of stealing a silver teapot. He had been maligned respecting a mustard pot, but it turned out to be only a plated one. Okay, so Roger Clay then talks like, oh yeah, I'm working for the accused, and I saw him show these lists good to different people in France, and then he said like, no, he's just talking, and he's like, no, I was never accused of stealing a silver teapot. It's so random. He was like, I was never accused of stealing a silver teapot, and I was accused of stealing a mustard pot, not a teapot. And this mustard pot, it wasn't pure silver. It was just coated in silver. So again, Darnay is very Darnay naman. See, Dickens is very good at exposing people in a very natural way, because this witness is like, it's like, I never stole, like I was never accused of stealing a silver teapot. It was a mustard pot, and it wasn't pure silver pagod. It was plated in silver. He didn't call he had known the last witness, so Barsad. Clay knows Barsad 7 or 8 years. That was merely a coincidence. He didn't call it a particularly curious coincidence. Most coincidences were curious. Neither did he call it a curious coincidence that true patriotism was his only motive too. He was a true Brighton and hoped there were many like him. The blue flies buzzed again, and Mr. Attorney General called Mr. Jarvis Lorry. Mr. Jarvis Lorry, are you a clerk in Tellson's Bank? Okay, so Barsad was the first witness, and then we had Roger Clay, and then we have Lorry, which we know Mr. Lorry very well already. How is he involved in this case? Mr. Jarvis Lorry, are you a clerk in Tellson's Bank? I am. On a certain Friday night in November 1775, did business occasion you to travel between London and Dover by the mail? It did. Were there any other passengers in the mail? 2. Did they alight on the road in the course of the night? They did. Mr. Lorry, look upon the prisoner. Was he one of those 2 passengers? Okay, so if you remember, guys, in Chapter 2, The Mail, Book 1, Chapter 2, The Mail, it was mentioned that Mr. Lorry was traveling in the carriage, and there were 2 other people, right? And then I remember even, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in the review, that Dickens really brings, the details in Dickens' work are very important. So here we are in Chapter 3, Book 2, and he's talking about this journey, this carriage journey in France. And Mr. Lorry is a witness because of it. And they said, like, did you notice any other passengers that night you were in that carriage? And he said, yes, there were 2 other passengers. And then they asked him, Mr. Lorry, look upon the prisoner. Was he one of those 2 passengers? I cannot undertake to say that he was. So if you remember in the descriptions, guys, in Chapter 2, how did it describe these 2 other passengers? Do you remember? Do you remember how Dickens described these 2 passengers? Okay. Does he resemble either of those 2 passengers? Both were so wrapped up, and the night was so dark, and we were all so reserved that I cannot undertake to say even that. Mr. Lorry, look again upon the prisoner. Supposing him wrapped up as those 2 passengers were, is there anything in his bulk and stature to render it unlikely that he was one of them? No. You will not swear, Mr. Lorry, that he was not one of them? No. So at least you say he may have been one of them. Yes, except that I remember them both to have been, like myself, timorous of highwaymen, and the prisoner has not a timorous air. Did you ever see a counterfeit of timidity, Mr. Lorry? I certainly have seen that. Mr. Lorry, look once more upon the prisoner. Have you seen him to your certain knowledge before? I have. When? I was returning from France a few days afterwards, and at Calais the prisoner came on board the packet ship in which I returned and made the voyage with me. At what hour did he come on board? At a little after midnight. In the dead of night, was he the only passenger who came on board at that untimely hour? So, okay, pause for a while. So when you go through the questioning of Mr. Lorry, they said, yeah, was he one of the people in the carriage? And then Mr. Lorry was like, I don't know, because they were so covered up. If you remember, Darnay really said they were covered up good completely. There were so many coats, so many scarves, a hat. He couldn't see them. And then Mr. Lorry was like, no, I can't say it was him because they were so covered up. And then they said, could it have been him? If you put a coat on him, if you put scarves on our accused, could he be one of the men traveling in the carriage? And Mr. Lorry was like, yes, he could be. If you put all of those things on him, it could be him. And said, so you won't swear that it wasn't him? And Mr. Lorry was like, no, I can't swear that. Okay? But he said then that, but those two men seemed very fearful, and the accused doesn't look like the man who would be fearful. And they were like, well, have you ever seen someone pretend to be fearful? Is it possible that the accused was just pretending to be fearful? So it's very obvious now that the Attorney General is very set on calling the accused guilty. And Mr. Lorry is kind of like, Mr. Lorry as a witness, I don't know, you think about it. Do you think his witness is convincing? Do you think his testimony is convincing about the guilt of our accused? Okay? And then they mention something that Mr. Lorry is sure of. He met the accused on their way back to France. So this is 5 years later, guys. But if you remember, we ended book one with Mr. Lorry leaving France with Dr. Manette and Lucy. And the accused was the one who's accused of being a criminal was in that same boat. That night they were traveling from France back to England. Okay. At what hour did he come on board? At a little after midnight. In the dead of the night, was he the only passenger who came on board at that untimely hour? He happened to be the only one. Never mind about happening, Mr. Lorry. He was the only passenger who came on board in the dead of the night. He was. Were you traveling alone, Mr. Lorry, or with any companion? With two companions, a gentleman and lady. They are here. They are here. Had you any conversation with the prisoner? Hardly any. The weather was stormy and the passage long and rough, and I lay on a sofa almost from shore to shore. Miss Manette, the young lady to whom all eyes had been turned before and were now turned again, stood up where she had sat. Her father rose with her and kept her hand drawn through his arm. Miss Manette, look upon the prisoner. To be confronted with such pity and such earnest youth and beauty was far more trying to the accused than to be confronted with all the crowd. Standing as it were apart with her on the edge of his grave, not all the staring curiosity that looked on could for the moment nerve him to remain quite still. His hurried right hand parceled out the herbs before him into imaginary beds of flowers in a garden, and his efforts to control and steady his breathing shook the lips from which the color rushed to his heart. The buzz of the great flies was loud again. Okay, so they said nga, Mr. Lorry said, I know he came on board, but I didn't talk to him at all because it was very stormy that night and I felt sick. But two other people were traveling with me, Dr. Manette and Miss Manette, Lucy. And they called, okay, Miss Manette, please stand. And she stood up and they said, look at the accused, look at the prisoner. She looked at the accused. And then this guy, I mean, I don't know if it was explained in the last chapter of Trickeratolo. He's a handsome guy. And the one being accused of being a traitor. And he was very calm all throughout the trial so far. But when Lucy looks at him, he looks away, murag siya na nervous. Murag for the first time, he showed weakness when Lucy looked at him. Okay? Miss Manette, have you seen the prisoner before? Yes, sir. Where? On board of the packet ship just now referred to, sir. And on the same occasion. You are the young lady just now referred to? Oh, most unhappily I am. The The plaintive tone of her compassion merged into the less musical voice of the judge as he said something fiercely, answer the questions put to you, and make no remark upon them. Miss Manette, had you any conversation with the prisoner on that passage across the channel? Yes, sir. Recall it. In the midst of a profound stillness, she faintly began. When the gentleman came on board, do you mean the prisoner? Inquired the judge, knitting his brows. Yes, my lord. Then say the prisoner. Okay, so she said, yeah, unfortunately, I was also in that boat. Okay, and they're like, don't talk about your emotions, talk about the facts. Okay, so yeah, talk about that. So she said, okay, so the gentleman came on board. She said, what? Who's the gentleman? The prisoner? She's like, yes. She's like, call him the prisoner. Don't call him a gentleman. Okay, so the judge is having a bad day. So the judge is not in the mood for emotion. He wants the facts. He also wants a beheading. Okay. When the prisoner came on board, he noticed that my father, turning her eyes lovingly to him as he stood beside her, was much fatigued and in a very weak state of health. My father was so reduced that I was afraid to take him out of the air, and I had made a bed for him on the deck near the cabin steps, and I sat on the deck at his side to take care of him. There were no other passengers that night but we four. The prisoner was so good as to beg permission to advise me how I could shelter my father from the wind and weather better than I had done. I had not known how to do it well, not understanding how the wind would set when we were out of the harbor. He did it for me. He expressed great gentleness and kindness for my father's state, and I am sure he felt it. That was the manner of our beginning to speak together. Okay, so how did Lucy and the accused start talking those 5 years ago? See, the accused Kuno approached them because he noticed that the father was sick. Because again, this was right after they left the Farges wine shop, right after they were trying to leave France to get back to England. It was a stormy night. The father was sickly. He was still very sickly at this time. And he needed help. Lucy didn't know how to protect him from the wind. And since they were the only people on the boat, this handsome guy, this gentleman who is now a prisoner, approached them and said, like, do you need help to protect him from the wind? And that's how they got started talking. That's how they got to know each other. Let me interrupt you for a moment. Had he come on board alone? No. How many were with him? 2 French gentlemen. Had they conferred together? They had conferred together until the last moment when it was necessary for the French gentlemen to be landed in their boat. Had any papers been handed about among them similar to these lists? Some papers had been handed about among them, but I don't know what papers, like these in shape and size. Possibly, but indeed I don't know, although they stood whispering very near to me because they stood at the top of the cabin steps to have the light of the lamp that was hanging there. It was a dull lamp, and they spoke very low, and I did not hear what they said, and saw only that they looked at papers. Now to the prisoner's conversation, Miss Minette. The prisoner was as open in his confidence with me, which arose out of my helpless situation, as he was kind and good and useful to my father. I hope, bursting into tears, I may not repay him by doing him harm today. So she said, yeah, he was so kind, and that's why he started talking to me. And then she started crying and was like, I hope that this act of kindness will not get him in trouble today. Okay, so ask yourself the question, how do you feel like Lucy? How do you think Lucy feels about the accused? Okay? Miss Buzzing from the Blue Flies. Miss Manette, if the prisoner does not perfectly understand that you give the evidence which it is your duty to give, which you must give, and which you cannot escape from giving with great unwillingness, he is the only person present in that condition. Please to go on. He told me that he was traveling on business of a delicate and difficult nature, which might get people into trouble, and that he was therefore traveling under an assumed name. He said that this business had within a few days taken him to France, and might at intervals take him backwards and forwards between France and England for a long time to come. Did he say anything about America, Miss Manette? Be particular. He tried to explain to me how that quarrel had arisen, and he said that so far as he could judge, it was a wrong and foolish one on England's part. He added in a jesting way that perhaps George Washington might gain almost as great a name in history as George III. But there was no harm in his way of saying this. It was said laughingly, and to beguile the time. Any strongly marked expression of face on the part of a chief actor in a scene of great interest to whom many eyes are directed will be unconsciously imitated by the spectators. Her forehead was painfully anxious and intent as she gave this evidence, and in the pauses when she stopped for the judge to write it down, watch its effect upon the counsel for and against. Among the lookers on, there was the same expression in all quarters of the court, insomuch that a great majority of the foreheads there might have been mirrors reflecting the witness. When the judge looked up from his notes to glare at the tremendous heresy about George Washington. Okay, so the whole time Lucy is talking, she has this expression of worry on her face. Yeah. Her forehead's kind of knitted, and yeah, as she's talking, she's worried the whole time. And yeah, the thing about Lucy is everyone loves Lucy, and so even the people watching in court were listening to her so much, and yeah, her emotion kind of passes to everyone. Yeah, everyone in the court had the same expression on their faces, and yeah, they were feeling what she was feeling. It was a sense of worry and anxiety, and she's kind of worried the whole time she's talking. So everyone watching her, it's also like has the same expression on their foreheads as they listen to her. And then she said Darnay joked something about George Washington. Yeah. Well, George Washington, he's gonna be as famous in history as George III, the King of England. And the judge is like, oh, what in the world? Like, was offended by that joke, which actually is accurate. George Washington did end up being as important in history as George III. Okay? So, Mr. Attorney General now signified to my lord that he deemed it necessary, as a matter of precaution and form, to call the young lady's father, Dr. Manette, who was called accordingly. Dr. Manette, look upon the prisoner. Have you ever seen him before? Once, when he called at my lodgings in London some 3 years or 3 years and a half ago. Okay, so they met 5 years ago, but then he came back into their life 3 or 3.5 years ago, as Dr. Manette is talking. Okay, can you identify him as your fellow passenger on board the packet, or speak to his conversation with your daughter? Sir, I can do neither. How come? Why can't Dr. Manette remember the prisoner or the accused from 5 years ago? Why do you think? Answer that in your own heads, okay? Why do you think couldn't he recognize them? Right? It was right after being in France, being traumatized, being crazy. So obviously he doesn't remember a lot of that time. His mind was not prepared but to take in a new acquaintance, okay? Is there any particular and special reason for your being unable to do either? He answered in a low voice, there is. Has it been your misfortune to undergo a long imprisonment without trial or even accusation in your native country, Dr. Manette? He answered in a tone that went to every heart, a long imprisonment. Were you newly released on the occasion in question? They tell me so. Have you no remembrance of the occasion? None. My mind is a blank from some time. I cannot even say what time. When I employed myself in my captivity in making shoes, the time when I found myself living in London with my dear daughter here. She had become familiar to me when a gracious God restored my faculties, but I am quite unable even to say how she had become familiar. I have no remembrance of the process. Mr. Attorney General sat down, and the father and daughter sat down together. A singular circumstance then arose in the case, the object in hand being to show that the prisoner went down with some fellow plotter untracked in the Dover mail on that Friday night in November 5 years ago, and got out of the mail in the night as a blind at a place where he did not recognize, but from which he traveled back some dozen miles or more to a garrison and dockyard, and there collected information. A witness was called to identify him as having been at the precise time required in the coffee room of an hotel in the garrison and dockyard town, waiting for another person. The prisoner's counsel was cross-examining this witness with no result, except that he had never seen the prisoner on any other occasion, when the wigged gentleman, who had all this time been looking at the ceiling of the court, wrote a word or two on a little piece of paper, screwed it up, and tossed it to him. Opening this piece of paper in the next pause, the counsel looked with great attention and curiosity at the prisoner. Okay, so this is the whole argument of the ones who want the accused to be to be killed, to be executed as a traitor. Okay, they said that he traveled in the Dover mail where Mr. Laurie saw him, got out, okay, and then another witness saw him in an inn, get the papers and the lists. Okay, this witness, who is unnamed, said, it looked like him good. This man, the accused, took the papers, and then he brought it back to France, or brought it back to England in the same boat as Dr. Manette, Lucy, and Mr. Lorry. Okay, so that's kind of the 3-point thing that they said. Okay, they said that he was in the Dover Mail, and then Mr. Lorry might have seen him, although he was covered up. It's not sure. Okay, he got off the carriage, went to this inn where another witness said nga, I saw him get the list. I saw that man get the list. And then he brought those lists, traveled back to England, where Miss Manette and Dr. Manette, they were in the same boat. And then Clay and Barsad said he used those lists for a traitorous purpose. Okay? Already we know that Clay and Barsad, they are not reliable witnesses. Okay? They are gamblers, they are thieves, they owe money to the accused. So right away, they're not valid witnesses. Okay? Mr. Lorry in the Dover Mail isn't also a very good witness because he was covered up. He was bundled up. So he said, I don't know. I can't tell. If you put scarves and coats on the accused, he might have been one of those men. And then we have Lucy Manette, who obviously has feelings for the accused. She calls him kind. So he was in that boat, but she doesn't have actual proof that he was delivering traitorous material. So the one real witness in this whole case, guys, is this guy that saw him in the inn. He said, I saw that man get these documents in the inn. Okay, that's the only real valid witness that we have. And once he said that, this guy, the whole trial, one other person in the courtroom is just looking up at the ceiling the whole time. Okay, the whole time this back and forth is going on, this gentleman, this guy is just looking up at the ceiling. And when he heard the testimony, he wrote something down on a piece of paper and he threw it to the lawyer of the accused, of the one who's being accused of being a criminal. Okay, he read it and then he continues. So it's like he sent him a note. This guy who was staring up at the ceiling throws a note to the lawyer reads it and then continues. Okay. You say again you are quite sure that it was the prisoner. That's the lawyer. Okay, the witness was quite sure. Did you ever see anybody very like the prisoner? Not so like, the witness said, as that he could be mistaken. So he said, yeah, you're sure you saw this prisoner? And then he was like, yeah, I'm sure it was him. Like, what if it was someone who looked like him? And he said, I've never seen someone who looks like the prisoner. Okay, look well upon that gentleman, my learned friend there, pointing to him who had tossed the paper over. So the lawyer said, look at that person who threw me the paper, the person who was looking up at the ceiling, look at him. And then look well upon the prisoner. How say you? Are they very like each other? Allowing for my learned friend's appearance being careless and slovenly, if not debauched, they were sufficiently like each other to surprise not only the witness, but everybody present when they were thus brought into comparison. Okay? So he said, look at my friend over there, the one who threw me the piece of paper. Doesn't he look like the one you're accusing of being a traitor and a criminal? And the witness looked at the one who threw the paper, his hair was a little messed up and he was kind of like slow, like his clothes were kind of not neat and pristine. He compared him to the accused, who is very well put together, but they look alike, you guys. Okay, they look alike so much. The witness noticed it, and not only the witness, everyone in the courtroom kind of gasped because they were so shocked. Oh my, they do look very similar to each other. The friend of the lawyer and the one accused. Okay. My lord, being prayed to bid my learned friend lay aside his wig, and giving no very gracious consent, the likeness became much more remarkable. My lord inquired of Mr. Stryver, the prisoner's counsel, whether they were next to try Mr. Carton, name of my learned friend, for treason. Okay, so Mr. Stryver, guys, he is the lawyer of the accused, and then Mr. Carton is the friend of the lawyer. And Stryver was like, so if you say that they look super alike, and you say that the accused, you're sure the accused was the one getting the papers in France, then are we going to try my friend, Mr. Carton, next? Because the whole case rests on your testimony that you saw my client getting the document. So if you say they look super alike, then maybe it was not my client, but maybe it was my friend, Mr. Carton. But Mr. Shriver replied to my lord, no, but he would ask the witness to tell him whether what happened once might happen twice, whether he would have been so confident if he had seen this illustration of his rashness sooner, whether he could be so confident having seen it and more, the upshot of which was to smash this witness like a crockery vessel and shiver his part of the case to useless lumber. So the witness got kind of rattled. Oh, okay, so are you sure it was really my client? Or could it have been Mr. Carton, or could it have been someone else who looked like him? And the witness got kind of so rattled. It was like, oh, I don't know, Mark. His whole testimony fell apart na noon. Mr. Cruncher had by this time taken quite a lunch of rust of his fingers. Remember, his fingers are always rusty. And the whole time we were watching, he was chewing on his fingers because it was so thrilling, the court case. In his following of the evidence, he had now to attend while Mr. Shriver fitted the prisoner's case on the jury like a compact suit of clothes, showing them how the patriot, Barsad, was a hired spy and traitor, an unblushing trafficker in blood, and one of the greatest scoundrels upon earth since accursed Judas, which he certainly did look rather like. How the virtuous servant Cly was his friend and partner, and was worthy to be, how the watchful eyes of those forgers and false swearers had rested on the prisoner as a victim, because some family affairs in France, he being of French extraction, did require his making those passages across the channel. Though what those affairs were, a consideration for others who were near and dear to him, forbade him even for his life to disclose. How the evidence that had been warped and wrested from the young lady whose anguish in giving it they had witnessed came to nothing, involving the mere little innocent gallantries and politenesses likely to pass between any young gentleman and young lady so thrown together, with the exception of that reference to George Washington, which was altogether too extravagant and impossible to be regarded in any other light than as a monstrous joke. How it would be a weakness in the government to break down in this attempt to practice for popularity on the lowest national antipathies and fears, and therefore Mr. Attorney General had made the most of it. How nevertheless it rested upon nothing, save that vile and infamous character of evidence, too often disfiguring such cases, and of which the state trials of this country were full. But there my lord interposed, with as grave a face as if it had not been true, saying that he could not sit upon that bench and suffer those allusions. Okay, so Mr. Shriver closes the argument. He closes the debate, and he kind of, you can read it again. It's very brilliant, guys, okay? He's a good lawyer. Mr. Shriver is a very good lawyer. And he said, yeah, this case, it's nothing. There's no good grounds for it. There's no grounds for you to call my client, the accused, a traitor, okay? Because Barsad and Cly are not good witnesses. Everything else is very vague. There's no testimony that really proves him as guilty. Okay? Mr. Shriver then called his few witnesses, and Mr. Cruncher had next to attend, while Mr. Attorney General turned the whole suit of clothes Mr. Shriver had fitted on the jury inside out, showing how Barsad and Cly were even 100 times better than he had thought them, and the prisoner 100 times worse. Lastly came my lord himself, turning the suit of clothes, now inside out, now outside in, but on the whole decidedly trimming and shaping them into grave clothes for the prisoner. And now the jury turned to consider, and the great flies swarmed again. Mr. Carton again was the one looking up at the ceiling, the one who threw the paper, the friend of Shriver, and the look-alike of our accused, okay? Looking at the ceiling of the court changed neither his place nor his attitude, even in this excitement, while his learned friend, Mr. Shriver, massing his papers before him, whispered with those who sat near, and from time to time glanced anxiously at the jury, while all the spectators moved, more or less, and grouped themselves anew, while even my lord himself arose from his seat, and slowly paced up and down his platform, not unattended by a suspicion in the minds of the audience that his state was feverish. This one man sat leaning back with his torn gown half off him, his untidy wig put on just as it had happened to light on his head after its removal, his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the ceiling as they had been all day. Okay, so Mr. Carton, he's a bad boy of literature, good guys, okay? Lawyers always had to wear wigs, man, in court during this time, but this wig is kind of, these white wigs, it was kind of like half off, and then his robes were kind of like torn kind of off his, but he's a cool guy. He's not sloppy. he's not sloppy messy. He's like cool messy, where he's so like just kind of chill, looking up at the ceiling. Chirkara, this is one of Chirkara's biggest literature crushes. Good, just a huge crush on Carton. So many past grade 10s girl students have had a crush said on Carton because he's kind of like the bad boy of literature. He's one of the best um characters in literature in general. But usually, actually, both girls and guys also really find him cool. Like you can't deny that Carton is a very cool character. Okay, so girls love him, guys find him cool, because he is. That's the way Dickens wrote him. Okay. Something especially reckless in his demeanor not only gave him a disreputable look, but so diminished the strong resemblance he undoubtedly bore to the prisoner, which his momentary earnestness, when they were compared together, had strengthened. That many of the lookers on, taking note of him now, said to one another they would hardly have thought the two were so alike. Mr. Cruncher made the observation to his next neighbor and said, I'd hold half a guinea that he don't get no law work to do, don't look like the sort of one to get any, do he? Yet this Mr. Carton took in more of the details of the scene than he appeared to take in. For now, when Miss Manette's head dropped upon her father's breast, he was the first to see it and to say audibly, Officer, look to that young lady. Help the gentleman to take her out. Don't you see she will fall? Okay, so murag si Carton, he's so chill. He's kind of sloppy. He's looking up at the ceiling. Everyone's kind of like, he doesn't mandi ayo. He looks like the accused, but their personalities seem so different because the accused looks very polished, very clean, very attentive, but Carton is the opposite. He looks so like he doesn't care. Okay, however, it only looks that way, guys, because even though it doesn't seem like he's paying attention, the moment Lucy, in waiting for the jury to come up with a decision, she faints because she can't handle the pressure. The moment she faints, Carton is the first to notice, Hoy, take care of her, she's about to fall down. Okay? So Carton was the first to notice Lucy fainting. There was much commiseration for her as she was removed, and much sympathy with her father. It had evidently been a great distress to him to have the days of his imprisonment recalled. He had shown strong internal agitation when he was questioned, and that pondering or brooding look which made him old had been upon him like a heavy cloud ever since. As he passed out, the jury who had turned back and paused a moment spoke through their foreman. They were not agreed and wished to retire. My lord, perhaps with George Washington in his mind, showed some surprise that they were not agreed, but signified his pleasure that they should retire under watch and ward, and retired himself. The trial had lasted all day, and the lamps in the court were now being lighted. It began to be rumored that the jury would be out a long while. The spectators dropped off to get refreshment, and the prisoner withdrew to the back of the dock and sat down. Mr. Lorry, who had gone out when the young lady and her father went out, now reappeared and beckoned to Jerry, who, in the slackened interest, could easily get near him. Jerry, if you wish to take something to eat, you can, but keep in the way. You will be sure to hear when the jury come in. Don't be a moment behind them, for I want you to take the verdict back to the bank. You are the quickest messenger I know and will get to Temple Bar long before I can. Jerry had just enough forehead to knuckle, and he knuckled it in acknowledgement of this communication. A shilling. Mr. Carton came up at the moment and touched Mr. Lorry on the arm. How is the young lady? So they went out, and then Carton went up to check on her. She is greatly distressed, but her father is comforting her, and she feels the better for being out of court. I'll tell the prisoner so. It won't do for a respectable banker gentleman like you to be seen speaking to him publicly, you know. Mr. Lorry reddened as if he were conscious of having debated the point in his mind, and Mr. Carton made his way to the outside of the bar. The way out of court lay in that direction, and Jerry followed him, all eyes, ears, and spikes. Mr. Darnay! The prisoner came forward directly. You will naturally be anxious to hear of the witness, Miss Manette. She will do very well. You have seen the worst of her agitation. Okay, so Carton goes outside, says, is she okay? And then they were like, yeah, she's okay. And then he told Mr. Lorry, I can be the one to tell the accused that she's okay because I'm sure he's worried. And I know you don't want to talk to him because if a banker is seen talking to a possible criminal, he's not called innocent, it might ruin your reputation. So again, Carton seems like this non-caring guy but he actually is very smart, very attentive, very he thinks about other people, okay? And then so he goes into the courtroom and he talks to the accused. His name is Darnay. I don't know if this was mentioned in the last chapter, but Darnay, it's Carton and Darnay, the ones who look alike. And he tells Darnay that Darnay, Lucy is fine. I know you're worried because she fainted. She's okay. Okay? I am deeply sorry to have been the cause of it. Could you tell her so for me with my fervent acknowledgments? So he said, can you tell her that I'm sorry I caused her stress? Yes, I could. I will if you ask it. Mr. Carton's manner was so careless as to be almost insolent. He stood half turned from the prisoner, lounging with his elbow against the bar. I do ask it. Accept my cordial thanks. What, said Carton, still only half turned towards him. Do you expect, Mr. Darnay? The worst. It's the wisest thing to expect and the likeliest, but I think their withdrawing is in your favor. So, sabi nga, sige, I'll tell her. And again, Carton is so chill. He acts like he doesn't care. It's almost rude the way he acts. Yeah, he acts like he doesn't care. It's kind of, it comes off as being very rude. Okay? Nga is like, okay, fine, I can tell her whatever if you want me to. And then, how are you? Are you scared? And then Darnay is like, I'm expecting the worst. Okay? And then Carton's like, it's good to expect the worst, but it's good that they're taking so long in deciding. Loitering on the way out of court, not being allowed, Jerry heard no more, but left them, so like each other in features, so unlike each other in manner, standing by side, both reflected in the glass above them. So Jerry could look at them and like, whoa, physically they look so alike, but in terms of personality, Darnay, the accused, is so polite and so sensitive and so put together. Carton, the lawyer friend, is very no care, kind of rude looking, okay? But they do look very alike. An hour and a half limped heavily away in the thief and rascal crowded passages below, even though assisted off with the mutton pies and ale. The horse messenger, uncomfortably seated on a form after taking that refection, had dropped into a doze when a loud murmur and a rapid tide of people setting up the stairs that led to the court carried him along with them. Jerry, Mr. Lorry was already calling at the door when he got there. Here, sir, it's a fight to get back in again. Here I am, sir. Mr. Lorry handed him a paper through the throng. Quick, have you got it? Yes, sir. Hastily written on the paper was the word acquitted. Acquitted means innocent, okay? So Darnay was found innocent. If you had sent the message recalled to life again, muttered Jerry as he turned, I should have known what you meant this time. He had no opportunity of saying or so much as thinking anything else until he was clear of the Old Bailey, for the crowd came pouring out with a vehemence that nearly took him off his legs, and a loud buzz swept into the street as if the baffled blue flies were dispersing in search of other carrion. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 3. So why do you think is it called The Disappointment? Think about it. Why do you think? Got it? Called Disappointment because people were expecting, they were hoping for a beheading, but he was found innocent, and therefore it was a disappointment for everyone. All right, that's chapter 3. So Trikara will take chapter 4. Guys, I hope you're enjoying this so far. Again, I hope this process of listening to us, reading with us is working for you. It's a very good book, so I mean, really enjoy it. It's not every. I mean, it's one of those rare books. I don't like rereading books, but Tale of Two Cities is one book I don't mind rereading. Good. So